All right, we're live. You're welcome to another episode of your favorite podcast where we talk about the things that you want to talk about, but you can't because you won't, because we talk about it instead. All right, today we're going to be talking about an interesting topic, something that really hits at the heart um, of an issue or an experience that is quite unique to a number of us who exists within the sphere of dealing with crossing between being African but being European as well. Essentially, looking at the African identity versus European influence. We're exploring the tension between Nigerian and African cultural identity and the weight of European societal expectations. This is going to be quite an interesting one, I think. What does it mean to navigate these intersecting worlds? How does it work for us being proudly Nigerian or African and navigating a world steeped in European cultural norms? What does it mean to grow up with one set of values at home, only to step outside into a society that speaks, thinks, and judges through a completely different lens? Well, I think we can kick this off. Maybe just talk a little bit about, really high level, about our experience juggling that balance. Jab, you want to take that first? What's it been like for you, just handling these two identities within one kind of lifestyle?
Well, thank you everybody for joining us today. Yeah, very interesting subject. Maybe I'll start with a summary, and that's to say that perspectives change constantly. When I was in Nigeria, of course, like I knew there are black and white people and Chinese and fairly kind of knew that, but I don't think that I ever thought of myself as a black person because I was surrounded by black people. I I spoke the language, English, broken English, was there, different ethnicities, spoke Hausa, schooled in the West, so understood Yoruba, but perhaps, as much as I spoke, understood more than I spoke, did a bit of Igbo in school. So essentially, that was the sort of environment I grew up in. And then when I came out or traveled, I think for the first time, I start to realize that even the English is not straightforward. It's you know to give you an example, this might be a medical example, but it's the only one I can think of the top of my head. So, if a patient says, "I feel sick" or "I'm being sick," they mean vomiting. Whereas in Nigeria, that meant somebody being ill. So straight away, you start to realize that even the language is, although you're speaking English, but people understand you completely different. I felt like I didn't grow up in the culture, didn't quite understand it. It was very difficult to integrate. I did make efforts, I would say, to integrate, but I found that, quite challenging. The drinking culture, did a bit of clubbing, and just didn't understand the idea that people would just go and just get hammered and get drunk and like not be able to hold a sensible conversation. I kind of felt like, well, if you drink, like you just drink so that you can like have a nice time and chat to people, not like just get drunk until you can't even sit or stand up. So it's that sort of setting, and then you come to work, and again, totally different environment to how I was. So there was a culture shock. If I'm going to be totally honest, I dived into it, tried to acclimatize. But over time, obviously, once you start to understand the environment, and for someone like me, because I've invested quite a bit of time in sort of understanding history and all of those things, you start to look at things in a totally different way. And I think you end up just mixing and matching, just finding something that works for you, if I can put it that way. So I think I said it was going to be a summary, but that's kind of where I am at the moment.
Thanks, Jab. Farouk, I mean, we've got a video that we're going to jump into that's going to probably give this a bit of context, but it's still useful to still get our own general experiences. Farouk, you want to maybe tell us a little bit about yours?
It's nice to be back after 2 weeks in the wilderness. I've missed all of you guys, and
I
I've
bet
missed
you
all
missed
those.
you.
I've missed all those out there listening in. My experience is not dissimilar to that of Jabs at all. Uh, I would want to engage with this conversation using a framework. I'm a frameworks person, kind of understanding this identity at a personal level, at a family level, and at a societal level. So, on a personal level, similar to Jabs, uh, I only had two identities before I traveled to Europe. And that was fundamentally as a Nigerian, quote and unquote, an Igala man. And then to also an important extent at the time as a Muslim. Those were the two influences that shaped my sense of self. And that was anchored around pride in heritage, respect for elders, love for food, a good time, being loud, time with friends. And those were the kind of things that, if I thought at the time that being Nigerian, what did it mean to me? That's what it meant. It was time with Yemi and Co. Talking politics, and doing all the things that people did. And then moving to the UK and then interfacing with the idea, with other concepts about life, ideas about race, ideas about equality, justice, fairness, and those were the and that recognition that one was considered black, and then trying to really switch between that duality of 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 um, of interpretations of self. And I use the word interpretation of self because there are many European values that and that I've embraced, that I found positive and powerful and useful frameworks that I've used to navigate life, particularly around work around being a bit more understanding their liberal culture aspects of it within Europe, their the movement for equality, racial equality, people who are disabled, and those ideas of justice. Another key difference was that I think identity back in Africa is also centered around tribe fundamentally, and then maybe religion. In Europe, it's more around whether you were more on the conservative side or on the liberal side or in the center of those influences. So those were kind of key key differences. Another layer of it I'd like to introduce because it's important to what I'd like to discuss later. It's then the influence of Europe on us, even while we were in Nigeria. So whereas I've talked about how I saw myself, but a lot of my aspirations, a lot of the things I wanted in life were also shaped by Europe. For example, I speak English. I wanted to go to London to school. That influence was from our colonial past, and the disparity in wealth and the fact that wealth has power. The best universities were in America and Europe, and every bright kid, every aspirational African wanted to transit there. So it's been an experience of being very proud of my heritage, but also starting off in life, really looking up to the European identity and wanting to be a part of it. Certainly from a professional perspective, I wanted to go to the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine to study because it was the best school in the world as I saw it at that time. So I'll stop there, and then we would, as we talk more, we'll develop these ideas a bit more. Thank you.
Fantastic. And mine is pretty. It's going to be a lot. It's going to be really short. Fundamentally, I've always, because since I was a kid or since I was fairly young, especially with the background I've had, I came from a polygamous family. So my father had kids from 3 women, and there's quite a few of us. There were 9 of us across the that's tribe, shall we say, and they were all from different races. So I've always had that experience of having a sort of international background, international family, and England was just automatically our second home for all of the kids, because the parents were fundamentally based here, or the woman in this dynamic, and so coming here was almost, or dealing with England was almost second nature. It wasn't particularly strange. But at the same time, it's quite interesting trying to deal with that dynamic of a culture where you don't necessarily fit. When I was younger, my dad still has a place in Southwest London, which is quite interesting dealing with, because within that area, when I was younger, the world was not very accommodating of Black people. I'm going to be very upfront about that one. It was just not. I remember walking down the street one day there was a man and his dog, and there were so few Black people that the man and his dog both stopped and they're both staring. I was walking past him. I tell this story to anyone that's interested in the history of of dealing with multiculturalism here, about how even the dog was surprised to see a Black person. The dog stopped and was looking at me like, huh? But I guess we can jump into this in a little bit more detail in a second. I'm going to play a video and then I'll, hand over to Yemi to give us a bit of his Yemi moderation magic. Let me just dive into this one really quickly. And then we go. Can you see my screen? See my screen?
Yeah.
Yep.
Let's go for it.
There doesn't appear to be audio, though.
It's subtitled, I suppose.
Yeah.
There's no volume, AK. 80. Right?
Sorry?
There's no volume.
No sound. Okay.
Yeah, maybe if we start all over again, we can just read the subtitles, because I just didn't start reading it because I assumed there'll be sound.
Apologies. That's my fault here.
Just sort of a warning to all our viewers. There might not be sound, but there's subtitles, so start reading it straight off.
Yeah.
Sometimes we have that bit of it.
Hilarious about my painful attempt to communicate in a language that is not even my own. See, this accent tells a story of survival. Tells how my mother tongue endured to this day, so I expect you treat my tongue with some respect. Every word, every syllable I utter comes from a riot within. My mouth is a babble between subconscious tongue, teeth, and vocal cord. So excuse you if my speech does not suit you. This speech comes from the slaughterhouse I call a mouth. See, my mouth is a battlefield. A clash of unyielding cultures, warring for dominance. See, my tongue is a traumatized survivor. Lost in this alien fluency. See, this accent is how I find my way home. How I say idikpi without biting my tongue. See, my tongue is forever at war with itself, forever fighting to decolonize itself, fighting to lose and regain itself all at the same time. So cut me some slack. I will not be ashamed nor refrain from saying my name, and no, I will not apologize for my mother's legacy. For there is no dignity in denying my identity. So to the girl in English class, it's about time you learn my own language too.
I switched.
Wow, that is fascinating stuff, right?
I'd like to share a reflection on that, please, if you guys would. That summarizes my approach to my African and Nigerian identity, my difference to any insistence that I conform to the European identity. That summarizes my approach to this topic today, and that's why I suggested we play this. Yemi, you've got the floor.
Maybe we should jump into that straight away, because
yes.
There are a few points when we were preparing for this that we kind of highlighted we needed to touch on that, and it was almost like this lady. Sorry, I don't know who she is, but she's a star already in my world. But it's
just to add, she's an Igala lady.
You don't do a deal for it. Okay, but she just kind of set out the main issues. Okay, and I'll put it to you guys and see what you say about it. Certainly. So in my experience, right, what I find, and correct me again, you can when you respond, if that's not your experience. That of everyone who lives in, say, Britain, for example, English is the world's language. So most people kind of try to have a bit of English. But it seems that it's the African that worries most about conformity, about accent, and I say that because I've seen Portuguese, Italian, French, Germans, Spanish. They almost kind of, in many cases, just enjoy their accent and just, English is not my first language. I've done well to be able to speak it, and they're just kind of comfortable with it. And there are lots of Africans that are comfortable with their accent as well. Don't get me wrong about that. I'm not saying, but what I'm saying is a bit more common. And I think it goes to the question, why this trying to blend in? Where is this coming from? It looks like jobs raring to go. So maybe, but where is this desire to conform coming from the African, particularly?
I can probably take this one first because I've got a thought before it disappears from my brain.
Yeah, go ahead.
So I think the separation of the world into the different types of world. So where we've got the first, second, third. No one ever talks about the second world, but the first, second, third world, fundamentally, in terms of less developed and developed, has led to a kind of stigma about the kinds of foods, the kinds of voices, the kinds of skin color, if I may even push it to that degree, that is seen as acceptable or that is seen as on par with what's great or good in society. So when we have the Spaniards, for example, or the French speaking in their own accents, it's fine because they are first world, technically speaking. They're developed countries. They have Americans come here to England and they speak their American with confidence, pride. Yeah, they're happy.
With no attempt to
they're
change
not trying. Americans, they don't even want to even try to even sound British. They want to sound as American as possible. Do you know what I mean? However, the others, those of us that have been classed as a different type of human, have this need. And this need, which is the interesting part, I think, for me anyway, is that this need is artificial. It's not necessarily being openly said. It's not something that's being objectively assessed. It's just something that we've decided to start doing because we also feel that intrinsically, viscerally, that we have to sound, we have to lose our culture. We have to blend into these people. We have to give them superiority. And I mean, I think that that's just not right. I agree with that video 110%.
So you're saying, Cross, if I get it correctly, that some of this is coming from an internal state of mind, right?
Yes, 100%.
Farouk, is that what you were trying to address?
Yeah, absolutely. You use the word superiority. I think from our perspective, it's I'd say it as I perceive it. It is the result of a deep-seated inferiority complex. That's what it is, and that's part of why in this space I am a sort of an activist. Not in the sense that I'm going to talk to people, but in the sense that when I listen to rhymes like that from Hafsat, it resonates because it is part of the reasons I deliberately refused any attempt to change my accent. It is part of the reason I'm very proud of my the Igala influence in my pronunciations. It is part of the reasons I'm very comfortable in my skin. And for who I am, and that's because from my teenage years, I have seen wider expressions of this inferiority complex. They need colorism. They need to become fairer, to use materials to become fairer. They need to speak like the British. They need to pretend you are rich when you are not rich. It pervades our lives. And when I've thought about it and reflected, they need to buy expensive things and show off. They need to live certain kinds of lifestyles. And when the more I've thought about it, and including how we speak and even the food we eat and how, I remember in primary school when teachers will ask what you've had for breakfast, how under pressure I would feel to say it was cornflakes rather than saying it was a camu or a kara. Do you understand? And how it's
a different level, though.
It's pervasive. There are correlations with colonialism, societal failure, personal failures, looking up to with wealth, the rich. I mean, we grew up in a landscape where wealthy nations and wealthy people are white. If not white, they are fair. If not fair, they speak English. All these levels of correlations and the trauma of failing and failure and all that. I think I'm not. So it is that. I'll let others speak.
So it seems as though from what you say then, because you've kind of broken it down again slightly further, which is helpful, that there might be two strands to this, which is on the one hand, you've got the external influences and colonization and the way the world is just structured hierarchically in terms of dominance and resources and achievement. But you've also got this other side of it, which appears to be a natural, almost socio-psychological response that if someone's more successful and pervasively so than you, that you're more under pressure to copy them. I mean, that just seems like what a child would do. Jab, we've taken your place like 3 times in a row. Suddenly your turn to talk about this.
Yeah, no. Okay, so I think if I'm going to use terminology to summarize that, I would use colonialism. I absolutely agree with Farouk, which is that what's causing it, it's inferiority complex. But what's causing that inferiority complex? I think that you're looking at the colonial legacy. So the Spanish, the French, the Americans, they have no need to try and conform and have a British accent because they were empires, right? They were so if you go to Africa, you hear people speaking Portuguese or Spanish or French or German because they were, these were their properties. So it's the same thing with England, whereas the rest of the colonial world, but I would say particularly Africa, I feel that we are especially afflicted by this particular illness or disease, or this particular, I think it is a disease to try and, I don't want to use the word conform because to try and I can't find the right word for it, but
assimilate.
No, it's not assimilation. It's not just assimilation, because the thing is, right, I don't know whether you guys have noticed, you find Nigerians who've never left the shores of Nigeria who when you speak to them, they would speak with a British accent or an American accent.
Just to say a joke there, that the one that I find funniest is not even the ones who never stepped on the shores of Britain. It's the ones who go to maybe a country like Germany, where no one actually speaks English, and then comes back with a British accent. You're like,
exactly.
You're right, mate. You're in Germany.
Yeah.
What do you mean you're right, mate?
No, it's not an assimilation. I think it's coming from a place of, again, inferiority complex. For you to do that, you accept that you're trying to aspire. You accept that. Why would you do that? First of all, it's because you believe that that's better than what you've got, right? And one of the reasons how colonialism really worked was because first it started as force, but along the way, or at the same time, there was a programming of our mind to make us look at our own cultures as inferior, and the Europeans as superior races. And in fact, they brought the whole thing about white supremacy and how they're, hierarchies of races, and they place themselves right at the top. And I'm going to say church is here now because we're talking about Europeans, because obviously, they're not. So when they came with their religion, they also made it clear that the God, the Christian God, who they made white, right? Even though, let's say, Jesus was somebody, somewhere in the Middle East, right? So they made him white, and what they said was, or what they programmed Africans to do, is to accept that this God who is white, who's got blue eyes, and he cares about everybody. He wants you to worship him, and the gods that we had were inferior, and we had to get rid of them. And in sometimes when that didn't quite work, what they did was encourage us to do was to take the names of our own local gods, almost in a sense, sort of confuse us, such that whatever you called your god, you named him Jehovah. I don't know if I'm explaining this properly. So I think that is where this is coming from. And just to round up, when, for instance, because I've heard people say this quite a lot, which is that they had aeroplanes, they had cars, they had a lot of these things, and you look at those and you kind of think, wow, how is this possible? And so when that person says to you, my God is better than yours, you don't question it. You almost automatically just kind of think, if his God can make him do this, he is definitely a superior person. So I think that is kind of where this is coming from. I think it's inferiority complex, but it is a legacy of colonialism. And I know that some smart person is going to say, well, if they had aeroplane and they had railways, then maybe they are superior. But it's not a question we're addressing today. But happy to answer that if there's any pressing need for me to answer.
Okay, why don't we move this forward a little bit? It's getting pretty interesting now. So we've kind of looked at it from the point, or almost like a sort of the psychological process that's going on. But what I'd like us to also do, because this, in a sense, we need to be advocating for our own position as the African, and almost sort of taking a collectivist approach to our problems. Okay, so we've got this issue where a lot of people see a need to conform, and we know that there's something going on in how they perceive the world that maybe is problematic, but we need to cut them some slack as well, which is that there is an immense amount of pressure they're going through that's causing this reaction, right? So let's think about the home, for example. Do we sense, of any of us sense, that this begins from the home, and that perhaps parents and families might be in a position where they themselves almost push for their children to almost sort of develop a more Western outlook to life, certainly more well-to-do parents. So the sort of schools that they send them to, the sort of holidays that they give them, the sort of exposure to arts and culture that they give them, that they're almost effectively, I wouldn't say condemn, that's a strong word, but charting their course around that path. What do we think the role is of family?
Let me have a quick go, because this fits into my framework of what's happening at the family level. I think just as at the individual level, it's a duality, and by that I mean we're very proud and promote many African identity and values. At the same time, we promote many European and foreign ones, and in between there is a conflict. I'll give you an example. Typical middle-class home in Nigeria emphasize prayers, emphasize coming together, emphasize hard work, emphasize respect for elders, and emphasize the value of community. And I think these are Nigerian and African values. But at the same time, parents will frown. Many of them will frown against speaking vernacular.
We got caution sometimes in school.
Yes, we get cautioned sometimes for speaking vernacular. We get encouraged.
But why even calling it vernacular? That's a problem.
Even that terminology itself,
what they call it.
Even that terminology itself, it's problematic.
Mm-hmm.
And I think I wouldn't question them encouraging us to study English as a problem in itself, because the reality of the world we exist, that English language is the currency for economics, for academics, for prosperity.
It's an advantage. It's an advantage.
It's a currency. Without it, it's like kicking you off the SWIFT system. You can't. It's like kicking you off the international banking system. So without English, you can't communicate. You can't go to school. You can't aspire in most of the world. So I wouldn't question about the fact that we call our local languages. We frown on it. Teachers tell you off in class. So at that level, there is that conflict. In terms of how we live. And then there's this aspiration, as Yemi said, parents want you to go, I mean, those that can afford it, talk about foreign holidays, take pride in it, foreign imported foods, take pride in it. I talk about primary school when we are told to say what we had for breakfast and the kind of pressure you feel to call a foreign brand because others are. And because that's seen as trendy, that's seen as posh, that's seen as being sophisticated. So yeah, at that family level is a duality. At values level, I think Nigerians are still very, very conservative as regards things like sexuality, but it's creeping in. And the final point I wanted to make is that the reach of media, social media, it has meant that, and the power, the disproportionate power the West and the Europeans wield in that has just meant that upbringing and influences at the family level is not just left to the parents and the community anymore. Kids are on YouTube, they're on Facebook, they're on Instagram, they're on WhatsApp. They learn all sorts. And I think that's more of a power dynamic into that. Power and influence dynamics rather than what we ourselves at that level promote. Thanks.
I think we're still on that point, just to kind of broaden that slightly more, because I think we've described the problem quite well. And it does seem from all the nodding that I'm seeing that we agree on the problem. Okay, so solutions. While still on that point, why don't we kind of slant it a bit towards more solutions rather than the description of the problem, which we appear to all agree on. So, Cross, what is the way forward?
Could I just make a point before we go into solution? So I think just to add to kind of agree with Farouk, but again, I think we need to try and put this into perspective again. I would say that there is no aspect of life in Africa or in Nigeria that is untouched by colonialism, right? So, and this is the reason, whether you're talking about church, whether you're talking about school, at home, the media, there's everywhere you go. It's the world as it is, the whole globe, until very recently, the rise of China, it's a Western-dominated world. So there's nowhere you go. The Europeans colonized everywhere in the world. So obviously, their culture, their customs, their way of thinking, their values have been exported to all of these places, and everybody has assimilated. So it's only natural. And the other thing to say is, back in the day of the colonialism, there's what you used to call the mother country. So that, or the metropole, or the metropolis. So that would be the center. So in this case, let's say if we're talking about, let's say, British, the Empire or French Empire, the empire would be the UK, and then all around, from Asia to wherever they've colonized, those would be the peripheries. So the center was where everything was. This is a place that everybody sort of like idolized. That's where you want to go on school. That's where the cathedrals are. That's where the education. So that's the reason why everybody aspires to come to London or Paris or any of these other centers to go and learn culture, right? So the center, the metropole, is like this center of excellence, center of learning, center of everything. So there you go. So it explains why our parents by default want us to learn English, speak it properly, why your native language is described as vernacular. And I remember very, very distinctly throughout primary, secondary school, we were not allowed to speak in our native language, even though, even Hausa, that was the major language in Northern, you couldn't speak it. So you had to speak English, and you had to try and speak with an accent. I say accent because the Queen's English doesn't have accent apparently, but you were taught to speak with a Queen's accent, as it were. So I think that kind of describes why you would find people who haven't traveled would still speak with a British accent. And in terms of like you, Farouk, I have actually deliberately refused to change my accent. I will speak well. I will try and communicate well and make sure that people understand me, but I haven't felt the need to change my accent because I feel like I think I'm confident in my own skin. I understand the shall I say I understand what is happening, if I can put it that way. I think I'm enlightened about what's happening, so I feel like I can hold my own.
Okay. So can I put a challenge out there, and I'll just sort of describe something very quickly, and maybe Cross can pick that up. So I've heard Farouk and Jab have said something around not, deliberately holding on to their Nigerian accent. And that made me reflect on my experience, certainly as someone who kind of started speaking Yoruba as a child. Maybe not from day one, because my mom's from the South, and I was born in Warri, and then we moved to Ilorin, and then we weren't speaking Yoruba at home, so I kind of learned it outside because my mom didn't understand Yoruba at the time. But you can describe me as a native Yoruba speaker because I think I can speak it as well as anyone else can over time. But as anyone who speaks Yoruba will know, there's not one Yoruba. There are many different ones, and actually some of it, if you speak the one they call the main one that appears to stem from Oyo, they say you can go to somewhere else like Ijesha and not understand the thing at all. Like it's not even. So I'm not saying you may not get it. Sometimes you may not understand the thing, right? So and then I went to Ondo to serve, where the dialect is very different. And I kind of liked it actually because it's very different. It kind of sounds like music. They're fun people, and when I got there, I started trying to speak it like them. What is wrong with that? Again, this is me just playing devil's advocate here. What is wrong with that? Because I got there and there were all the nurses I was working with, and the cleaners and the matrons and everyone. They're speaking like that. I kind of consciously or unconsciously, just what I would do because I'm with people and I enjoy being with them and I'm working with them, and this is how they speak, this is how the words they choose, which is different from mine, and I just start doing the same. What's wrong with that?
Can you hear me first of all? Let me just check that.
Yes, perfectly.
Yeah, okay.
Fantastic. So I think there's two things I want to just touch on. First is around media. I think media has been the catalyst, to your point, Jab, earlier that you're talking about. One of the key catalysts around what superiority means. It's not necessarily been colonialism, in my view. Anyway, I think colonialism is so long ago that they've needed something else to be able to hold on to that superiority, and that vehicle has been media. Media controls the world. It's just what it is. Whether we're talking about social media, whether we're talking about entertainment, whether we're talking about news, it's all about where that money is being pumped into to determine what it is that people think. I think that's been important. And what has been pushed is that I'm talking about all the third world countries, are inferior to the superior races, but technically speaking, it's still the same race. There's like sub races that come off the back of that. The second thing is we'll look at assimilation. I think to the question that you asked, Yemi, around is it all right actually to assimilate into the culture? I'd say I'd look at an example of what's happened. So I lived in Bradford while I did my master's, and it was quite interesting to see the difference in terms of how the Pakistani British who live there were able to deal with a duality. They had a very dual sort of experience or lifestyle where they are both Pakistani and British. Very interesting to see that dynamic and how that dynamic works. So, but even within that, you could see that's a problem. So currently there's a bit of a challenge in the UK with how some people like the EDL, the English Defence League, for those who don't know, who are not aware of these different sects, etc., who are trying to push this thing about how the the Asians are very different from the British, therefore the British, aka white, therefore do not deserve a place in the UK, which I think is utterly nonsense. But I can see where the thought process comes from. If you're moving to a culture, the expectation is that you assimilate that culture, not that you change it. Because to your point, Jab, you're fully into the colonialist concept. How do you not see that this is the same thing when you move to somebody else's land and you bring your own culture there? That is a precursor to colonialism. You're going in there to implement your own views and your own cultural values and your own ideologies and your own traditional concepts into this new place. That's what that is. So in my view, I think whenever people go, and this is an issue that's happening in America right now, and it's one of the big issues why Trump was able to win. I don't want to go into politics too deep. It was one of the reasons why Trump was able to win, why Brexit happened, why we were able to get conservatives in the UK for a long period of time. A lot of these things that I'm completely against, but some of them I understand. I think that issue of assimilation is critical. We should understand that assimilation is key when you move to a different place. Yield for
Three things I want to address. I'll leave Cross's points to the last because I am completely misaligned on that.
Gang.
Completely and absolutely misaligned on that.
Finally, you got there in the end.
Yeah, Yemi asked, is there anything wrong in speaking in the local accent? The answer is absolutely no.
Not just even accent, even sort of. So let me give you another example.
There's absolutely nothing. There's absolutely nothing wrong in embracing, enjoying, and engaging with your new environment. However you find it positive. When I say I'm an activist because I'm aware, because of a recognition of what I feel is driving it. If I didn't feel it was driven by inferiority complex and that was damaging to me and my people, I have no problem in itself with speaking like an American or a Brit or a French. If that's nice, if you have the skills and that's positive for you, by all means do it. My angst and my activism is directed at what I feel is driving it and how that undermines us. Some of our most successful icons from Africa are very comfortable in their own skin. Chinua Achebe, Wole Soyinka, even the more younger one, the lady, what's her name?
Chimamanda.
Ngozi Chimamanda. These people they identify as Yorubas, as Igbos. They are very comfortable in their own, and they are most recognized literally artists and writers. So I mean that should be a lesson for people out there. So I have nothing wrong, I have no problem with that. Second point, what's the solution? You asked earlier to the problems we've identified of this influence, which I think we all agree, that I would say it out. I think it's malign, it's undermining, because you have to believe in self. You have to identify self, believe in self, aggregate with self before you can grow and become powerful as a group, even as an individual, to reach your zenith. So solution has to be systemic, has to be governance, has to be long-term planning. The kind of intervention we see in China, where people come in, they deal with the educational system, they deal with societal values, they block out the noise, and they get 1, 2, 3 generations through a system of belief and discipline and hard work and focus, set the goals, and get society working. That has to be the solution. It has to be systemic, because from that top-down perspective, then it can permeate into homes, parents, families, and then the individual. Then now to cross. Colonialism is violence, always. People moving to America, poor people crossing the southern border in Mexico to go and work, to go and offer cheap labor to work in factories and on farms are not colonizers. It is always, colonialism is is always violence. So let's be careful with the wording.
Can I just chip in something there, Farouk? And I need to warn Cross. I think Jab and Farouk might be a little bit more familiar about this tag that I got in another group about sitting on the fence. And this is one point where I very comfortably just climb back on that fence. And I'll tell you why. What I hear Cross is saying there, even though I'm not totally aligned with him, and neither am I with you. Okay, neither am I with you. I think if our goal is to prevent conflict, right? And what I hear Cross is saying, I think it's just kind of maybe lumped it in together too closely. But what I hear him saying is that if what you're against is conflict, okay, there are many different ways in which conflict can happen. And clearly going to someone else's patch to almost kind of enforce is a strong word, but strongly promote and lay down your own culture. I can tell you this, anywhere you look, is just recipe for conflict. Okay, maybe not at the level of colonialism, which is an order of magnitude.
We can, if we dial that conversation down to conflict, to living harmoniously, community integration, I may be more aligned with you. But Cross called it colonialism,
which is why
and I think it's what emphasizing that colonialism is violence. Two, on the matter of assimilation, those that insist that we assimilate when we visit the UK and Germany and France and Spain and the US, they do not assimilate when they visit Africa or India.
Wrongs don't make it. Two wrongs.
Right? No. Let's make this point. They do not assimilate when they visit India, when they visit West Asia, when they visit Africa, and when they visit South America. Actually, when they visit, they come with gunboats and guns. They shoot, they kill, they take, they plunder, they exterminate.
No. Again, you have to clarify what you're saying.
We're talking about colonialism. Let me make this point.
In India, they don't shoot.
No. So this is I'm being dramatic here to draw the extremes. So when you go on with guns, with bombs, with planes and ships and drones,
no, there are lots of tourists, British tourists in India. They're not going there with guns and boats. No. We need to. Someone needs to stop that. Say, you need to make a distinction with what you're talking about. But there are many tourists in Gambia that are not going there with guns and boats.
Okay, now let's go to tourists now. Let's to equalize this. Let's go to tourism now. I've lived outside Africa for a while now, but a lot of people from here go to Morocco, they go to Turkey, they go to Thailand. I don't hear cries of come and assimilate from those people. These people go there and live their lives.
Because that's colonialism as well. And this is
my final point here is wherever you go. And this is to all of our audience. Wherever you go, you have a responsibility to your host. Obey the law. That's non-negotiable. Okay. Obey the law. You go to Rome, obey their laws. You come to England, obey their laws. It is a good thing to learn about wherever you are. So if I go to Thailand, I want to take a walk. I go to Morocco, I want to take a walk. I'd like to speak the language, try their food, interact. But there is absolutely nothing wrong in being yourself and appreciating yourself. If we dial up to what Yemi was saying, I think strongly promote certain things, and then maybe we can talk about that.
I'm saying some of this.
Let me answer your question.
Sorry, I need to clarify this because it's very important. Okay. I'm saying that colonialism can actually be extremely passive. It can be very passive because the old way of colonialism was take your cannons and you carry your horses and you do cannon and horses. Now we can use they are using media to colonize the world. This is my point. My point is colonialism isn't necessarily violence. If you capture the minds of the people, if you capture the minds of the young ones and you give them your values. Oh, we've lost.
Okay. It's all right. You'll come back.
If we use these mediums, whether it's social media, whether it's using regular media, TV, newsprint, etc., the Daily Telegraph, which has turned fully right-wing and got people going crazy with Daily Mail and stuff like that, Guardian getting people nuts on the left, and and the Mirror as well, turning people into crazies on the left as well. You can utilize this to create your own colonialism. And we've been doing this. The fact, and we talked about this in a few previous shows. We've talked about, Farouk's back. We've talked about some of these things. We've talked about the fact that there are there are values that we are incorporating in African culture that doesn't make sense. Why do we wear suits in Africa right now? It's not because we're colonized almost over 100 years, 110, 111 years ago. It's not that. It has nothing to do with that concept. It's about the fact that we look at what's politically acceptable today. If you look at what's happened when sorry, one sec, Jab. When you look at what happened with Zelensky, and he went to the White House and they told him you're not wearing a suit, that is colonialism. There was no violence involved. They're saying you need to be here on my page, in my way, doing things the way I want you to do it, without a single bullet being fired. That's colonialism. Colonialism has changed from the old school method where there was lots of people there on ground and forcing you to do things. Now they're doing things using social media, using monetary prowess, using economic. Right now we're seeing this already with America and what the deals that they've recently signed already off the back of the tariffs. That's what colonialism is. America is doing colonialism from the 21st century perspective, and we need to understand this. I'll pass that back.
Okay, right. So I think we're confusing a lot of things here. A lot of things. Let's just reverse back a bit to the point where Yemi asked that question about, is it okay to learn Kanuri with a Kanuri accent or what's to that effect? I would say that actually it's very advantageous wherever you find yourself to learn the language of the local people. I think it's good to experiment and eat the dishes that are there, wear the clothes of the people. That is not at all an argument that I have made. And that is not really what we are discussing. But for the purpose of the questions that have been asked, I think I need to clarify that it's important. I really think that it's actually very beneficial to learn languages. I think they enrich you. I think that if I were to go to live in, let's say, China or Vietnam or wherever, it just makes sense for me to learn the language. I'm going to go
want to speak the best Chinese that you can.
Yes, exactly. Because you're going to go to the doctors, you want to be able to say, this is what is wrong with me, for instance. Does that make sense? So to me, that is like a no-brainer. That's not what we're discussing here. I think because people have also mentioned assimilation. I don't think it's what we're discussing here. So assimilation to me would be if you went to live in a different country, make it your home. We are talking about you changing or adapting to the culture and the norms of those, of the host country, and almost, sort of like changing and adapting. That's how I understand assimilation, which is maybe kind of what we're talking about here. But the reason I was reluctant to call it assimilation is if you look at somebody who lives in Nigeria, who decides to speak with a British accent or a French accent, they're not assimilating because they're living in Nigeria. Why are they doing it?
They've been colonized.
So I know that you're saying, okay, to go back to your question about colonialism. Colonialism is an economic system, bottom line. Yeah, it's an economic system. And there are different ways to bring it about or to enforce it. And so it's not just one thing, right? It's the military force, it's occupation, it's the education or miseducating people, it's the media, it's a lot of things. So there are ways. All those are different methods of executing it or entrenching it. But that's what colonialism is. So to say that if a British Pakistani person, say for instance, they can't speak English, they go to their GP and they have to then have a language line to communicate to do that consultation. That's colonialism. It's just not. Yeah, we need to be very clear about this.
I'm sorry. I wasn't referring to that. I was talking more about the behaviors that happen in external countries. So, like when I went to the concept of people wearing suits in Nigeria.
Okay, so let me answer that. Yes. No. So again, that again placed in its proper context is the legacy of colonialism, because we weren't dressing that way before contact with.
What does that have to do with the example I gave of Zelensky? Zelensky was told, go and wear a suit, get out of this place, that you're insulting us by wearing your own whatever you want to wear. Why don't you wear a suit?
Cross, I think on that particular Zelensky point, actually, I think that's a very straightforward issue of courtesy. So if you're coming to my restaurant, I decide what the dress code is. You can choose to come or not.
Was saying
right, and I don't see any problems with that. So if this is my home,
I do.
Restaurant. No.
If you own all the restaurants, then you own all the culture around what people can wear and how they can dress. That's my point.
I guess the other point with Zelensky as well is they are from the same culture. And
no, they're not. No, Ukraine is not a similar culture to the US. Absolutely not. Completely different cultures.
Well, maybe more so than, say, Ukraine and India or Africa. And the perception within that system is you dress formally to meet for state functions.
What's stopping Trump from saying that to Tinubu coming there wearing a suit and not wearing a suit? If he comes there wearing his
can I just say this? Can I say this? We can't use an example of like that because Trump is Trump and he does things in Trump ways.
But that's my point. The difference that Trump is doing what they do in public.
I'm going to answer the question, but please let me land.
Yeah.
If Trump were to meet up with, let's say, Modi, thank you, and he has met up with Modi wearing his own thing, he's not going to kick off, is he? Or if Tinubu appeared in his attire, he's not. No, we've seen him. We've seen him.
Or even the Arab leaders.
We didn't know he was going to do this to Zelensky. No, we can't do that Arab leaders because they have more money than them.
But give me a chance to answer the question. You've asked the question. Let me answer the question.
Sure. Sorry, go on. I'm getting triggered.
Yeah. No, it's a different matter because the thing is, he is of the opinion that Zelensky is a salesman and he's been taking money from the American people, so he's got something very personal about that. And he said many times he does not like him in those military gears. So that is nothing to do with colonialism. That's just a Trump thing, right? It's not because Zelensky hasn't worn suit per se. That may have just been. No.
Okay, guys.
It is because guys. You can only colonize people who are less. You can't colonize people who are equals or more. It has to be less.
Guys.
It's not colonialism.
Yeah, I mean, over to you.
Okay, guys, let's move this conversation forward again. And just to kind of almost drag us back to move us forward. So when I asked the question about whether it was right to almost kind of taking aspects of the culture in which you live in, I wasn't asking it as a sense of kind of disputing what anyone said. I actually thought it was consistent with the things that had been said. The reason why I thought that question was important was to almost not make our view around this a criticism of our people, rather a sort of a critique where people can find some positives and some areas that need to improve, and that's the sort of context in which I thought that question was important, because what we don't want to do, and I say that because I've taken this view for a long time, that I think that the way forward, and again I hope that this becomes a source of views that either challenge what I think or perhaps agree with it, that I've come to the view, having interacted with a lot of Pan-Africanists, Jobs one of them, and a lot of other people, about how we move things forward for our people. And there are people who've got radical views around, just kind of re-engineering everything. And I take a much less radical view. I actually think that trying to re-engineer everything may be a little bit too traumatizing in a different way. And I say that because I take the view that sometimes the best ways to achieve progress is to reach a form of compromise that keeps the things that you value the most, but gives some ground to be able to accommodate other people, ideas, and values. So I'll give you an example for example, and then you see this a lot with sort of intermarried couples. So my mom, for example, who's Robo, married a Yoruba person, and you can see how she lives now. She's kind of a bit of this and a bit of that, but there's no conflict really. She knows who she is, and if you ask her, you know, where are you from? She's not going to say I'm from Lagos. She'll say I'm from, you know, Uvie local government. This is what she'll tell you. But then there's no conflict. She dresses one way today, the other way the other day, depending on the occasion. And you'd find this a lot. You'd find interracial couples who do that, right? They kind of give and take. And I think based on our history with the West, even though a lot of it has been abusive, I think circumstances has put us in a position where that is what we must negotiate with ourselves, right? We must be able to hold on to and promote the things that are most valuable to us without giving it up to Western influence, but at the same time accepting that our future has been interfered with in ways that are irretrievable by the West, and find ways to incorporate that into what becomes of our new culture. Culture, after all, is evolving. Have I said that right, or am I just being delusional? Again,
I think you're spot on. You're spot on. And what you are describing anyway is the process that takes place in every society. The West, before it formed into what it is today, is a result of many, many influences. I mean, Britain famously being invaded by the Vikings and the Romans, and whoever they are today is a balance and an evolution of all of that influences. Same the Chinese, the Indians, and I think whatever we're going to become as a people in future will be a compromise of all of these influences. So northern Nigeria, there's a strong Fulani influence there. Hausa is widely spoken. I hear some people, just like some very radical Pan-Africanists, would advocate a severance of any links or interaction with the West. Yemi, you recall the famous Ilorin conversations we have on the WhatsApp group. How some we advocate the Ilorin people expunge themselves from any Fulani influence. That's not practical. That's not realistic, and that's not progressive. It's not going to work.
It's madness, in my view.
And just as you say, it will cause a different kind of trauma with all sorts of problems. So it's that pragmatism. I mean, after all, culture is evolving. It's changing. 100 years ago, there were no Nigerians. Since 1960, we've had 5 decades of evolving the Nigerian experience. Good, bad, a civil war, annulled elections, military coups, a refinery, ethnic tension, herdsmen. We're cooking the Nigerian experience. Afrobeat, Nollywood, Pidgin English. These things didn't exist. They were not a thing 100 years ago. And whatever that Nigerian identity is going to evolve to be, will involve, of course, a strong Hausa Fulani component, a strong Yoruba component, a strong Benin component, a strong Delta component, and so that the people, the Nigerians who will be here in 100 and 200 years or 300 years, and we have 300 years of evolution of history, that we know our Nobel laureates, that we know our great writers, that we know our formidable politicians. We are creating all this from the ashes of the vandalism that was colonization. And I use the word vandalism because that's what I see it is, but it is what it is. And I agree with Yemi completely that we must build in a very realist sense and not react. I mean, look at the Iranians today. They were Zoroastrians invaded by the Arabs. And now they are Shia Muslims, and they embrace that as a new identity, but with a very strong Persian streak. And that's what we must become. What's happened has happened. But we must then take that, remember who we are. We'll go back to the topic for the day, the African identity, the Western identity, bring that together and create a Nigerian identity, and then build from there. And I think we are doing that. And I think 50, 60 years is early days in the history of a nation and of a people.
I think we're all gone. I think everything is going to get dissolved. I personally believe that we're going to end up in it's true. That's my view. I think we're heading for a monocultural system where in the next 50, 60, 70 years, there's just going to be one culture. The way we dress, the way we think, the attitudes that we think are acceptable, our cultural norms around how we greet, how we pray, how we do all the things that we do are being monotheized. They're being turned into a single view.
Where are we heading?
Behave.
Tell
Sorry?
us.
Surprisingly,
look in your periscope and tell us what it will be.
So surprisingly, I also think so. But I think that your time scale is massively optimistic. So I am talking thousands of years, and so it doesn't concern me at all. I think for my own sort of how far I can see, it's not going to happen, but it will happen. I think I agree with you. We're looking 3,000 years down.
No.
It's happening right now. If you look around,
it's happening now. But what Yemi is saying is that the destination will not be reached for thousands of years. And in that sense, I agree with Yemi.
I think we're there already.
So what do you think? What do you think it will be? Do you think it will be Chinese or Western? What do you think it will be?
Well, I think.
What will this monoculture be?
I mean, Jab's already raring to go. I can see him just say China.
He's just winding his engine.
But for me, I personally think the West is going to win. There's a number of reasons why I think the West. The West has the West. Look, I mean, and you know, we should have this conversation because we didn't talk. We should have talked about that this.
If you told me the West was going to win 20 years ago, I would agree with you.
I mean, I know that, and
I would agree with you. I think there are three strong, very, very strong influences today. The Western influence is still top there, the Chinese influence, and the Islamic influence. Those are the three. Those are the three influences.
Is it oil or Islamic influence? I question that. But if I may just land really quickly about that piece, because this kind of ties into what the topic generally is that we're heading to a point where it really doesn't matter the cultural views that individuals have. What matters is the cultural views of those in power. And those in power right now, I'm going to be very, very clear about this one. It's the West in terms of controlling media, in terms of control, not economically. Because I can see Farouk is like, no.
They're actually still in power. They've been in power for the last 300 years. If you're saying, and if you look at the data today, they still hold the most wealth. They still have the most influence. Yeah. They still have the most power. If you're looking at the data in the moment, but when you're looking at the trends,
I know, we'll get there.
India and China, in the next few decades, would overtake in terms of wealth and influence.
When we start talking about wood, we have an issue with that. But
I use the word trends.
I know, because the trend assumes that no one's going to do anything about it. But let's leave that one. The key thing for me is this, and we're going back to the main topic that we've got on hand here, right? Where we're talking about the African identity and European influence and how that changes everything. And for me, the way I look at this is that at the end of the day, it's really about those who are in control and those who have power. And those who have power, it tends to fall within a number of different spheres. It turns to economic power, which the West still has to a degree. China is fighting them, but it's still the West, right? It comes to socio-cultural power, and that's another key thing which the West is currently controlling. China is fighting that back with TikTok, specifically TikTok, and they're doing a pretty decent job of turning people into morons who just play around with their phones and stuff like that. And then it turns to political power, who can pull people into the rooms and make all the decisions that actually matter. And the West is still winning on all three fronts, in my view. And I think tying this back, because I imagine we're probably heading to a close soon, and I think that it is very important that we understand that at the end of the day, even though we want to hold on to our African heritages, and even though we want to hold on to our own historical backgrounds, and even though the Bradfordians who want to hold on to the Pakistani and the Indian heritages, and those in Birmingham, etc., are trying to hold it, the reality of the matter is everyone's been colonized. You've moved into a new country and a new culture, and we have to assimilate. We do not have a choice. It's like the Borg. The Borg has come in, and you are now one with the Borg. We don't really have a choice with these things. We try to pretend we have a choice. We try to pretend we have a choice, but our kids are going to start speaking. When they talk, they're not going to speak with our accents. Nope. They're going to speak with the British accent, and their kids are going to speak with an even more British accent because their parents had no Nigerian accent, and then we've lost it by 2-3 generations. It's a wrap. It's done.
Could I react then a
Cross,
bit?
I have a more nuanced view of this.
Sorry, guys. One second. I think Job's next, but before you do that, why don't I just quickly read out some of the comments here, and then Job can go, just so we kind of keep our viewers on board as well. So QB Finest has said, nice to see you guys. Thanks. And said, nowadays there's cultural days at work in the office. Bring your country's authentic cuisine, etc. We need to see more of it. I said a few other things, but also gone down to say globalization, it's happening, but people are fighting it, want their culture to rule globalization, but we are seeing protectionism from the US that is driving global protection. So we are going backwards at the moment. So Jab, what do you make of all of it?
Okay, so the conversation between Cross and Farouk. So I think, and as well as yourself, I think maybe in 1,000 years, 2,000 years, let's talk about human culture. I think that humans may look a lot more the same because of this globalization. I think what you find is there's a lot of intermarriages, similar to what you find if you go to Brazil, because in Brazil there's a mixture of everything. You've got Italians, Portuguese, Spanish, you name it, British, French, Indians, Dutch. Everybody is there, and the Brazilians have a particular look. I think that we're going to probably see. I think human culture, in terms of appearance, I think in 1,200 years we may be a bit more. We may look a lot more the same, is what I would say. In terms of culture, I am not convinced that is going to be a monoculture. I think it depends on which powers are in place. So to go back to your point, Cross, you mentioned about political, who controls the narrative and all that. I really think that in all of these, you need to look at economics, right? Because if you are the dominant economic power, you call the shots. So by default, if you're economically very strong, you're also militarily very strong because you've got to be able to protect your what you've got, right? Because if you're strong economically and you don't have the military power, well, sorry, your days are numbered. Somebody else is going to be there, right? Okay. Yeah. So it's economics that dictates all of these things. And you were mentioning the West. So if you look at the G7 or the G7, right, which is the former colonial powers, yeah, BRICS has already overtaken them. I don't know if you're aware of this. Yeah, so BRICS is overtaking them. And who are we talking about when we talk about BRICS? We're talking about brown and yellow people, if you want to call it that way, right? It's the non-Caucasian population that we're talking about there. And BRICS is only going to get stronger and stronger and stronger. And to come back now to be Q best, our commentator, our
QB Finest.
Okay, right. So to come back to his point about Trump, I've got this book. I'm going to talk to you guys about it on a different. Can you see it?
Nope. Kicking away
the ladder.
Yes. Okay. So this book, it's a very, very important book. I would recommend it to everyone to read. Essentially, Ha-Joon Chang is a professor of economics in Cambridge. And he said in this, his argument here is that ethnic majority, yes, absolutely. So his argument here is that the West developed by tariffs, right? That's how they developed, by tariffs and a lot of other other measures, basically, which is self-interested. But as soon as it developed, they then kicked away the ladder and started to tell us to do the opposite of what they're doing, which is absolutely true, right? So Trump has now gone back to using these tariffs. It's a conversation for another day. I don't think that he is going to. I think he's going to ultimately harm. I think he's going to accelerate the decline of the US. That's what I think. So, which is further going to make the G7, G8 weaker, and it will only allow BRICS to get stronger. That's what I think.
I mean, should we have a
want-
conversation about this specifically? I think this might be a good conversation for next week around the implications of the kinds of tariffs and the kinds of approaches to socio-economic values that Trump is bringing in. But, that's one for us, I guess, to discuss. But sorry. Yeah, go on.
I just want to bring a bit of nuance to what Cross was saying earlier. I think we're already beginning to see a cultural swing in terms of the cultural influence of the West. Hollywood is no longer the biggest movie industry. Nollywood and Afrobeat is going into spaces it has never gone before. Ijab says something. It's fundamentally about economics. After economics, then it's about population. Okay, there are 1 billion Indians, there are 1 billion Chinese. Their economies the Indian economy is growing in leaps and bounds, estimated to double in another decade. They will be everywhere, the way the Chinese are everywhere today. Car parks in the city, in the center of Manchester, we have Chinese writings on them. The Indians will be everywhere. They will go with their food, their culture, their music. They will go with everything. In the same way, the Industrial Revolution, the age of exploration, propelled Europeans around the world, and they spread their values and their culture and their language. It's the same way. Every corner of Nigeria, every corner of Africa, you see the Chinese today. We are learning from it. That's the way they are. That's the way the Indians will come, and that is the way the Nigerians are kind of evolving around Africa. And they can do it because it's a swing. So I think I disagree that I think the West has had its best days, and the trends are currently showing that others are rising. And interestingly, I then agree with Yemi that in the end, and again with the Brazil experience, we're all heading in the same direction. More secular, more integrated, more assimilated, similar values. I wouldn't describe it as more Western, but yes, with a very, very, very strong Western influence. The last 500 years, they've shaped our values, they've shaped our expectations, they've built institutions that will remain with the human race forever. And regardless of what happens to them, just like Yemi has advocated for Nigeria, we need to take all of that as the human history, as our shared experience, and then move to whether it were the Chinese or the Asian or the African century. One interesting statistics: in another 100 years, there will be more Africans on Earth than ever before. More Black people. We are breathing at a very, very fast rate. So yes, we'll be heading towards a monoculture. It will never be. I think in many, many thousands of years, that wouldn't matter to us. We will be more similar than we are today. But I think there is a swing and a blend.
The Misaligned podcast at the time will be talking about something different. Like you don't even need to worry about it. They'll be talking something completely different then.
Maybe live on Jupiter or transplanetary travel.
Mars, according to Elon Musk.
And in terms of these subcultures, Farouk, I think the thing I would say is that if you have a multipolar world, which is kind of where we are, what's the word I'm looking for now? Moving into, that's the era we're kind of moving into. So if you had 5 or 6 multipolar centers, chances are they are also going to export. I mean, their cultures will be dominant, and it's probably, you would also find that maybe a lot of people around the world would maybe, pick and choose and move this in. So in some way, yes, cultures might be different, humans might be different, but I wouldn't say it's a monoculture in the sense that we understand how everything now is now dominated by the Western, culture. There's only, suits and, certain kinds of food, I think that what you're going to probably find is 5 or 6 dominant centers around the world with their own culture, and so you can mix and match, eat whatever you want, but I think it's going to be something.
Yeah, me, I actually saw an interesting projection on Nigerian social media space a few years ago, and some of our audience may not like this. Somebody predicted that, interestingly, is an Igbo guy. He said the way he's looking at southern Nigeria, like another 100, 200 years, everybody will become Yoruba, because their influence on the general culture and the politics appears to be waxing stronger and stronger and stronger. Music, church, drama. You remember when Nollywood started, they had a very, 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 very strong Eastern component, but I think that shifted to Southwest a bit more over time.
Actually, not quite. So the original, if I remember correctly, the original Nigerian theater actually again started in the Southwest. So, and then which leads to the point I'm making. So, and at some point, the Southeasterners took over it, and then it's kind of swung back. And that's the point that I was going to make, actually, that you never know. This thing swing back and forth all the time.
That commentator's observation was that the Yoruba influence was growing, and very soon, there was southern Nigeria become like northern Nigeria that has been dominated by Hausas. Remember, the Hausa dominance doesn't mean that Igala people and the minorities are not there. It just means it's dominant. And his point was that in another century or so, the Yoruba culture will be dominant in southern Nigeria. That's kind of the coalition and monoculture we're talking about. It's not like others will disappear. It's about that major influence, such that people adopt it for currency.
Yes, and what you find, I think the example you use is actually a very good one. So in the Afrobeat space now, actually, there is no subcultures. I mean, if you play an Afrobeat song, every Nigerian can relate to what he's saying. It doesn't matter what core language they're using or not. The whole thing has become a Nigerian or even West African culture, even though there's sub-languages between in the middle of them. So, there's nobody, the Davido is as popular anywhere as is anywhere else in Nigeria, and P Square was the same. And did you know what I mean? Like, it doesn't, and that's I think in a sense, that's kind of where we're headed. And I think that's a good thing. I think it retains.
Sorry, Yemi, the thing is also, they use Pidgin English, which is kind of understood right across, at least West Africa. People can understand what they're saying.
So in a sense, we're evolving a monoculture in the African space. Isn't it? So I guess it's kind of real life experiment.
We're rolling. The comments are coming in really fast, so we're gonna roll through them a little bit quickly. So there's a comment here around asking about impacts of tariffs, protectionism, military leaders in Africa like Ibrahim. I don't know how to say that name, Traore. That's the dude that did the Traore, right? That he had the coup 2 or 3 years ago, wasn't it? I mean, I'm not sure the context of the question. So
I think this might be suggestion for topic for next year. I think when it came on, for next week. I think that's the suggestion there, if I'm wrong.
Okay. Yeah, okay, fair enough. I mean, we can keep this. I'll just save that there as a favor, as a reasonable topic for next
I think it'll be a good
one of these weeks. Yeah, all right, fair enough. And then everyone speak English. Well, okay. Well, maybe, who knows? I mean, we're already on the way there anyway. English is apart from I think Chinese is still the most spoken language in the world, but
I suspect that even when China, so I think that's where stats become misleading, right? So Chinese is the most spoken language in the world because
Chinese also
in three countries where one of them is 1.3 billion, right?
Exactly.
The reality is that the English language is 1,000 times more virulent than Chinese.
Yes.
And I suspect will remain so for a long time, even when China ascends to, and China will have to do something. China will have to incorporate the English language into itself. It will have to. I don't see how it's going to get rid. So that's one aspect of Western dominance that China will struggle to upturn. It's more than power, military power, economic power. That one is just cultural.
It's one of the enduring relics of colonialism. It's just the way Hausa is spoken in northern Nigeria. How are you going to upturn it? How are you going to upturn the fact that most of northern Africa speaks Arabic? The Arab Empire ended 1,000 years ago.
Yeah.
And Algeria, Libya, Sudan, they speak Arabic till today.
Yes.
Guys, I'm not sure about what you're saying, though, because again,
I think the language will be the last man standing.
Yeah, it might be the last man standing, but honestly, never say never. The reason is, if you've got the economic power, which China has, and it's the biggest trading partner of practically every single nation in this world. I don't know if you guys are aware, but these days what they're doing is everywhere you go now, they are now planting what you call is it School of Confucianism or something like that, where they've learned a bit from the West, and they're trying to teach about Chinese culture and language and all of those things. So
I'll ask you two quick questions to stimulate reflection on that.
Yes.
Why did and again it will agree with you and disagree with you. It depends on the culture you're coming up against. So when the Brits and the French and the Portuguese came across African cultures, we could not read or write. We did not have an empire building culture and expanding culture. They could easily wipe us off, okay, and replace with English and French. But the Turks ruled over most of Arab land for 700 years. They couldn't Turkify them. The English could not make as much inroad in China. The colonialists could not make as much inroad in China and India as they did in Africa or North and South America. So it kind of depends. It kind of depends on the language, whether you are writing it, what it's used for. So, I mean, look at the last 500 years, or since the end of the First World War. The West sits on the Middle East, militarily occupies them, but they've not given up their language and culture. In the same way the Turks couldn't in 700 years. So there's something about certain languages.
There's a new comment that's coming. A new comment just came in. Is there? Start speaking Chinese. I better get on Duolingo.
So just a few more comments to read out. So Kehinde Abu, that's our own Kenny, I believe, has said colonialism disrupted native systems and imposed hierarchies, shaping modern integration. Post-colonial policies often marginalize minorities. So I think she's kind of, just kind of teasing out some of the things we've mentioned earlier. But I wanted to say something.
I agree with her.
In closing, because we're in our dying minutes now, but I wanted to say something very quickly in closing. I would, this is a prediction. I'm not 100% confident that, but this is how I say things. I think even the Indian languages, so they call it Punjabi or Urdu or something.
Hindi, yeah.
They will be more virulent than the Chinese language. I have reasons to think so. So language is not just a means of communication. You can't impose language. There has to be something emotional about it. English language, the Americans have, with Hollywood and the music, they've done it. I don't see Chinese having that cultural skill. In fact, African languages, I can tell you, even Nollywood will outdo China in some areas. So our music potentially will outdo. I'm serious, and I'm saying, so I don't even actually see China's dominance being as comprehensive as the West has been, because the West dominated everything.
Our
language, everything. China can't. I just don't see them being able to do that, and I don't even hope that they should do that. There's no need. We don't want anyone to do that anymore.
No, we don't want anybody to do that. But can I just say this? So I think two things. First thing is, not being familiar with something is not the same thing as saying that thing does not exist or is not as potent or strong. Where I'm going with this is because you're not familiar.
So you're saying I'm not familiar with the Chinese.
Thank you. You're not familiar with Chinese music, Chinese films, Chinese because it's not. You haven't had contact with it. If you see what I'm
coming. No. But the point I made, I play. Let me explain to you. I play football with Chinese people every day. So my estate here is full of Chinese people that moved from Hong Kong. It's a very popular destination with them. They've got WhatsApp. I interact with them. When they come in, they're so you see cultural, we mentioned the other day about when we talked in the restaurant, I said there's a few things about Chinese. There are group behaviors that you can tell. They're generally reserved, quiet people. If a Nigerian moves in here in a week, they have a barbecue, they're blasting music, right? So, and these things have implications, okay? And this is the point I'm making. They have implications. You cannot, it's not just about numbers, it's about behaviors in groups, right? Nigerian music, I am confident, will make more inroads than Chinese music. If
not that we'll make, even as a poor, unorganized nation, I believe we're already doing so.
The reason is that our behaviors and our attitudes is more conducive with that kind of success.
So I hear what you're saying,
than Chinese is. That's the argument I'm making. It's not that I'm not familiar, just because I've not heard.
I hear what you're saying, but again, you always have to go back to economics. So, sorry guys, I did not study our viewers. I didn't study economics. I don't know anything about economics, but I know a bit about economics. I know that the world revolves around economics.
You know enough to be able to put me in my place here.
Well, to make what I think is
Jabs, yes. Make it our final comment for today, and
okay.
I'll make it. We're an hour and 30 minutes now.
Okay, all right.
Last word.
Yes, final comment. So economics is really very important, and the point I'm trying to make here is that if you have the economic power, in spite of the problems that China has had with deficiency, so to speak, with language, it's the largest trading partner of most countries in this world. If the Chinese come to your country and they say we want to do business, we want to do X, Y, Z, and they insist on, because if you go to Lagos, I gather, and so many other places, we're now starting to have Chinese signs, right, on the road signs and all of those things. So it's only just China is only just remember 50 years ago, China was a very poor country on a similar level of development as us. So it's only been 40 years. Give China another 50 years. I reckon that a lot of people are going to be speaking Chinese.
Won't happen. Well, the music won't happen. Lebanese music is more popular in Nigeria than Chinese music. Lebanese music. India, I mean, this is not a joke. They just have no chance on that field.
Yemi, don't be too confident. The Saudi government just made Mandarin compulsory for its
No, I'm not talking about language. I think you guys have, again, that's why I'm talking about music specific. Again, I'm not talking about language. Language might be slightly different with
because
I was talking about language.
But once they learn the language, they'll use it to watch movies and music.
Okay, let's see if in our lifetime,
not in our lifetime.
I don't think in our lifetime.
Let's say, what's it? Scholarship to go study in China, study engineering in China.
That's the point I'm trying to make. Remember that we all speak English. Didn't happen overnight. In 1960, less than 5% of the Nigerian population were literate, but a lot of an educational system. So if they begin to use money to get governments to make people speak their language, 2-3 generations, everybody will speak it.
Thank you.
It's all economics. If that's what they want to do, and they have the money, they'll do it. If you made me the Kogi State governor or the Nigerian president today, and I change our curriculum and say everyone must learn Mandarin, and I change the textbooks, 2 generations, or the 200 million Nigerians will speak
because all that needs to happen is somebody says, we're doing French and English and whatever, we're now going to introduce Mandarin on the curriculum, right? And China is a dominant force, and everybody wants to do business.
And in return, they build us ships and roads, and they give us everything, and that's it.
Yeah.
There's Alliance Francaise everywhere in the world. They fund everything. Only countries they colonize speak French. No other countries.
But that's soft power. That's soft power.
Everywhere in the world. There's Alliance Francaise everywhere in England.
That's soft power.
French. None. Go anywhere in England. Nobody speaks French. No, there's Alliance Francaise everywhere here, absolutely everywhere. Nobody speaks French.
No, but these were competing empires, remember, and one was more dominant. That's all it is.
I want to say thank you.
My closing arguments.
I want to say thank you to everyone that has joined us. QB Finest, you've engaged a lot. Thanks for your comments.
Yes. Okay.
Kainde Abu, thanks for your comments.
Mhm.
Jabs, Yemi, and Cross. It's nice catching up with you guys again after a short
Before you
hiatus.
leave, Farouk, wait, hang on. You're already exiting. Don't exit. We need to give closing arguments. Are we giving closing arguments? Let's close the arguments. Farouk, since your blood is ginger.
1 minute each.
Yes, let's go real quick. Who's going first, Yemi?
You can go first.
Okay, so for me, I think there's three key things. There's one around colonialism, because based on the topic we're talking about is the difference between African identity and European influences. First thing around colonialism. One is that colonialism is not necessarily through violence. I don't believe it's through violence. I think there's lots of different ways that we can get colonized, whether it's through the use of media, whether it's through the use of social media, which is also quite important, whether it's
Bear in
through the
mind,
use of
guys,
social.
you have 1 minute each.
Yep, of course, social political views, etc. I think colonialism doesn't necessarily work like that. Things like language, etc., don't necessarily hold. Assimilation is a key critical thing as well. I think that when you move to a different culture, you move to a different place, you should assimilate to that place. It's just what it is. If you don't want to go back to where you came from, that's the reality about it. And that's my view about that. It's critical to life and carrying on the cultural views of that specific area. You can hold on to your core values, but you need to make sure that you're assimilating. I think that's quite critical. And finally, economics. I think from an economic perspective, I mean, I can say this because I'm actually an economist. That's my background, right? I can say that sociopolitics is definitely more important than economic power in terms of your actual financial or your international trade balances, etc. And then the importance of media, social media, and values in terms of what the different people hold as valuable is more important than any monetary thing, which changes what it is that we hold true to ourselves. So as Africans in the diaspora, very often we're going to lose this based on these different factors. But I'll hand over with that.
Farouk, 1 minute. You've
I
wasted
think,
10 seconds already.
yeah. There's a lot of strength and a lot of things to be gained by being original, being yourself, being true to your heritage and your values. At the same time, change is constant, can be positive. We should embrace it, and we should engage with the future as individuals, as a people with confidence and with originality. That's all from me.
Thank you. Job.
Okay, thank you. So my point, I feel constrained. I have to respond to Cross in my final comment. It really is very important to emphasize.
You're taking it personal.
It's very personal. Yes, it's very important to emphasize that colonialism is an economic system, and if you want to understand this world, if you want to make sense of this world and how the world is structured and how things work, you have to understand economics. If you know who pays the piper, almost certainly you're going to understand how the dance is done. So colonialism is an exploitative system. It's violence, and the examples that Cross is given is not colonialism. I think that is the point I wanted to make. In terms of, I will agree with Cross as well as Abu, which is that wherever you are, learn the language, eat the food, dress as the people dress, and enjoy life. Life is too short. Thank you.
Thank you very much, guys. I'll just say something as well, very briefly in closing. I tend to agree with all the sort of closing remarks. Generally, I take the view that we need change. Unlike some Pan-Africanists, I am a Pan-Africanist myself. I don't take the view that you need to throw everything away. I think whatever's happened to you, even the things that you didn't cause and the things that you didn't want, they all become a part of you. And in a sense, what you need to do is to own all of it and kind of sieve and, take out and promote the most useful ones and kind of systematically relegate the less useful ones, but all of it becomes a part of you. So for example, English is our language. It has become our language. And I don't see a world soon where we can do away with it, But at the same time, the Hausas and Igbos and the BBOs and Yoruba and Kanuri, they're also our languages, right? For different reasons, but they are our languages. And we own all those languages as much as the other. And that's how I kind of view it. I think you can have multiple strands to your identity. And the British have come in contact with us, and there's something about us that is a part of them as well. It's just how life is. Your paths cross, your lives cross. Thanks, guys, for being here. I think it's a very interesting episode yet again. Let's do it again next week.
As always.
Yes.
We are Misaligned, signing out.
Thank you.
Everyone.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you.